Senator Omidvar.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make my questions very quick because I want to get two questions in. And my first question is to Mr. Robichaud. You spoke in your brief about the severe immigration consequences for non-citizens of Canada. Could you describe what they are and what the remedies could be?
Yes, thank you. That's an excellent question. And I think one that has been overlooked greatly, although recently in news it has come up with Minister Goodall addressing that in certain capacities, but it clearly is not an understanding or agreement from what I can see with different jurisdictions. And although I can only speak anecdotally because I'm not a U.S. immigration lawyer, as I understand it, any conviction and any admission that one has used any type of illicit substance, particularly cannabis, could deem them inadmissible into the United States permanently. And so I may be wrong about that, but that is certainly a concern that has come back across my desk as a criminal defense lawyer in working with U.S. immigration lawyers, that people are barred inadmissible. And that also raises other concerns because the question then becomes who has access to this information. And as Mr. Freeman has indicated, the ticketable aspects, that may or may not be accessible under Section 51, is it? And that too raises concern. So I think a lot of foresight needs to be put into how this is going to play out for immigration or emigration from Canada. With respect to immigration, if that was what you're asking, yes, then this does have long-term effects. I'm not an immigration lawyer, but what I know is that if people are facing certain offenses, it will deem them inadmissible into Canada and make them deportable, regardless of the sentence that they actually face. So as best as I can recall, if one is eligible for a sentence to serve in the higher range of the 14 years, they're deemed inadmissible into Canada with only an appeal on humanitarian grounds for staying here. So that means, for example, the 18-year-old person who's come to Canada as a refugee who passes a joint to a 17-year-old would be deemed inadmissible with no right of appeal, well, an appeal subject to humanitarian grounds. That last aspect I'm not entirely sure of, but undoubtedly there are major immigration consequences.
Thank you. Perhaps we can get back to this later, but my second question is to Mr. Conroy and Mr. Boyd in Vancouver. We heard very compelling testimony last week from a young person who talked about her fears of social sharing and the harsh penalties associated with a 19-year-old sharing a joint with a 17-year-old. I wonder if we can learn something from the sexual consent legislation, which says that a 14 to a 15-year-old can engage in sexual activities with someone older than themselves as long as that person is less than 5 years older than him or her, and as long as there is not a relationship of trust, authority, or dependency. Is there something to learn from this?
There may be a little something to learn, but I'm not sure it's a great analogy, sexual assault. I think more of the era in which I was raised, where the penalties related to underage drinking. And, so an analogy between sexual assault and social sharing makes more sense in the context of alcohol or another substance of that kind than in the context of that age difference. So I would agree that if you're talking about a 40-year-old and a 16-year-old with cannabis, it's not the same kind of element as with sexuality, but there's something of a correlation there.
Just to be clear, we were talking about sexual consent, not sexual assault.
Yes. Yeah, I know, but yeah.
My view is that the flaw in the bill is that there's no source for the 12 to 17-year-olds, so you're forcing them to go to a black market because, as Bill Blair explained to the committee, it's the provinces that are then passing legislation. BC recently has proposed that they will have a minor in possession offense with a penalty of up to $2,000. So you're driving it underground. You should have an amendment whereby a parent or a guardian or an adult with the written consent of a parent or a guardian should be able to supply the 12 to 17-year-olds so they don't go to the black market, so that you are looking at Youth Criminal Justice Act principles and saying, we want to have a conversation, the parents and the guardians, about this. We don't want you to go to the black market. We want you to have a way of learning about this that way and not through the criminal justice system.
Okay.